Hey everybody, I don't know about you, but as you've watched out over the world, the war in Russia and Ukraine is not just isolated to Eastern Europe. It's spread all over the world, and you can see it in market instabilities. You can see it here. People who do not think that that war is affecting you, all you got to do is look at gas prices. You look at your food prices. You see the global change that has happened. But you know something that's also affected investments as well. And I've said all along, Legacy Precious Metals is your navigator. They're the ones that see you through to get to the next level. The good news about this is, even with market volatility, market instability, you've got options. And gold prices are rising as investors turn to gold. And gold presents a hedge against this inflation and that protects you against the weakening dollar, which we are seeing. Legacy Precious Metals is the only company I trust to deal with gold and silver and the other precious metals. You need this investment. You need this as part of your portfolio to keep you buffered from what we're seeing in the world, war and volatility in the market. This is where you need to be. Call Legacy Precious Metals today. Be proactive about this. Get on board with it. Call them at 866-528-1903, 866-528-1903, or you can download their free investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com. legacypminvestments.com, your navigator in a volatile world of investments.
You want to listen to a podcast?
By who?
Georgia GOP Congressman Doug Collins.
How is it?
The greatest thing I have ever heard in my whole life.
I could not believe my ears.
In this house, wherever the rules are disregarded, chaos and mob rule. It has been said today, where is bravery? I'll tell you where bravery is found and courage is found. It's found in this minority who has lived through the last year of nothing but rules being broken, people being put down, questions not being answered, and this majority say, be damned with anything else. We're going to impeach and do whatever we want to do. Why? Because we won an election. I guarantee you, one day you'll be back in the minority and it ain't gonna be that fun.
Hey everybody, it's Doug Collins. Welcome back to the Doug Collins Podcast. I got a special treat for you today, and we're coming up on the anniversary of September 11th. This will be the 21st year of September 11th, 9/11. A date that for many of us, carries many emotions. I can remember my own day. That was a day that it was interestingly enough in my life. I had set aside that I was going to spend the day. My wife was a teacher. The kids were all at school, and I was just going to spend the day at home, in really quiet solitude, prayer. And we were thinking about the future. Never did I know that date would a call from a friend would say, turn on your TV. Then my life really, I think like a lot of our lives were frozen in time for a moment on the day. This is a day that we look back on. It's a day that I think we can draw strength from, but it's also a day in which it reminds us of our role in the world, but also a remembrance of what was going on during that time. And today is just a special time. Jim Serger is with us, and he has written a book on 9/11. And I'm excited to have him with us to share about that book, but also share just a lot of what's going on around this, because I know there's a special emphasis for this book as well, and we want to get to that. So, Jim, welcome to the Doug Collins Podcast.
Yes, sir, Doug. Thank you for having me on today. I really, really, really appreciate it. I really do.
Well, it is, and we're coming to that special time, and I say special time, and I mean that in a solemn way. I mean it in a positive way, but also in not a way of flippantly saying that. I think we look at it in many ways that what happened on that date changed a generation in many ways, and it changed not only a generation of my age, because I was at that point, in my 30s, generations, and you've gotten to know my producer. He was in, before, age 10, my kids, my wife, your families as well. Talk to us about your new book. Tell us what, emphasize from it and, who it's helping, and then let's get into some specifics about it.
Absolutely, sir. So the time is 9/11. So we see 9/11 at 9:11 a.m. We see the time again at 9:11 p.m. So for about 4 or 5 years leading up to me manufacturing or coming up with this concept, I kept seeing the time 9/11. So when I was an operations manager at the Indianapolis airport, I was searching an aircraft. And when you're at an airport, you always want to know what time it is. For some reason, you have to know what time it is. And it seemed like in the morning when I was doing it, I would look, it'd be 9/11. And then when I worked the late shift at night 2 times a week, I would look and it'd be 9:11 p.m. And I kept saying to my wife, there's got to be a rhyme or reason, because when I see the time 9/11, I automatically think of that day, of where I was and what we went through as a country in 2001. So about a year ago, I was watching a documentary on World War II, very compelling, very heartfelt, very powerful. And as soon as it was over with, it was 9:11 p.m. And I looked at my wife, I said, it's 9:11. And she said, Jimmy, you better get started on that book. So that's what I have done. It correlates with the time, because it's going to be 9:11 a.m. tomorrow. It's going to be 9:11 p.m. in 6 months from today. And when we actually visually see that time, or we hear that time, or we say that time, all of us that can remember that very, very horrific, sad day in 2001, remember where we were, who we were with, who we picked up the phone and called, who did we check in with, neighbors that hadn't spoken to each other in 5 or 6 years or didn't even know each other's names became friends and colleagues that day. It's a very powerful day for America. And that's where the concept of this book came up with. So, yes, sir.
Well, I mean, and you bring up an interesting point, because there's a song. I mean, there's a lot of songs that came out, but Alan Jackson, wrote the great song about this time. And it basically time stood still. You remember what you were doing. You remember everything. I can remember for me, I had, like you, Jim, in your background, you were the Navy. You came through the Navy. I'm in Air Force. I started, what a lot of people don't realize, I did about almost 3 years in the Navy. So before coming back. And so, but I came back in, and I was in the process of coming back in, but it's going to be in the Air Force. And sort of 9/11 actually accelerated that a little bit. I came back, my official comeback in date was in 2002, but it was during that time it accelerated during coming through. The questions that I have, about your book, talk about what your premise is. We know it's about 9/11. We know it's about changes, but what's without giving away, because I want people to go buy it. And also it's you're helping a foundation here as well, correct?
Yes, sir. It's Tunnel to Tower. So as well as I know, 3 years still counts as lifetime service in the Navy. So everybody has to become firemen in the Navy. I mean, that is a floating city out at sea. So when the ship came into port, I was the lead fire investigator for the in-port emergency fire team. So I actually had to go and get certified, as well as you or anybody else that was in the Navy, to become firemen. So when 9/11 hit, I kept thinking about all the firemen and the first responders. They were going up while everybody else was being evacuated, was going down. And my heart went out to all of them. And it's still to this day it does. Matter of fact, when my daughter was young, we used to take donuts or some bagels and to the local fire station on 9/11. Just a small remembrance of a thank you to our local fire department, our first responders.
Right.
So what I did is I contacted Tunnel to Towers, which is out of New York City. And I asked them about this story, if I could give them a portion of the sales to this terrific foundation. And they said, absolutely. And I told them the whole concept about 9/11 and about the time. And the gentleman that I spoke to on the phone said, I'd never heard of that perspective or taking it from that angle. So he said, absolutely. So he and I came together. We came up with a beautiful front and a beautiful back with Tunnel to Towers logo. So with that, the Siller family out of Manhattan, they just don't work in Manhattan. They help people down in Georgia. Right. They help veterans down in Miami, Florida. They help fallen first responders or a disabled first responder in Utah. So it's not just in New York. Right. They are helping everybody. Mm-hmm.
So what did you find out when you started, now that your wife, you have a wife like me that when she finally speaks, she says it, okay, like you said, Jimmy Douglas, for me, it's time to get it done. What started it? What's the stories? What did you find out?
There's an old commercial from the Army that the Army used to run back when you and I were in our 30s, a unit of one.
Yeah.
And for some reason, they stopped doing those commercials. But interviewing these 90 folks from Georgia, I have a lawyer from Georgia. I have an NBA retired Hall of Famer from Orlando, teachers from Cincinnati. They're all over the place. But the way everybody closed their statement was, we were a unit on that day as Americans, as one. Everybody came together. I call it the pinch of salt. When you and I were a little boy, our parents maybe would say, hey, I got to run over to the Joneses' houses and get a little sugar. Yeah. Or I got to go over. And we don't have that too much anymore. Everybody's kind of on their own. But on that day, on 9/11, all my neighbors were in the cul-de-sac that day. It was almost like a barbecue for no other reason but just to share. and console each other. And neighbors that I hadn't spoken to that lived way down on the other end that you just waved to on the way to work, well, they were there. And we were all talking together. How are you doing? Do you need help? And that's what everybody's story was about. Friends became real friends. Mm-hmm. Next door neighbors became real next door neighbors. And there was a woman in there that she didn't know anybody when she was inside the Sears Tower. But when she was evacuated down to the bottom in the dock area, everybody in the loading dock area that day were her best friends.
Right.
Consoling each other. She was crying. Nobody had cell phones. And they had this little rinky-dinky black and white TV with rabbit ears. And that's how they got wind of it. But she remembers that day and she describes it just like all the other 90. We all became Americans on that day. No backgrounds, no differential, nothing. We were Americans. And that's what everybody's story was about. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think you look at it, and I think, from individual stories you talk about, I was pastoring at the time, and it was, I remember that the next day we had our service. We had a special service. We took the names that we knew at that point and scrolled them on the screen. It was just a prayer time as a coming together. And Jim, for a generation, I guess what's amazing to me now is my children. I have one child who probably remembers it a little bit. She was in kindergarten. The other two, they really, it's not a remembrance. I had one that was 4, one that was about 6. So, I mean, it's not really as much of a remembrance. We're now getting into a new generation. This is just, I guess how fast time flies, that this is not their moment. You go back in time and you have Pearl Harbor, you have the Kennedy assassination, you have the, Martin Luther King, you go to Watergate, you go to Reagan being shot, you go to the child exploding. It seems like every generation has at least one or two of those, oh my moments. And this one was another on the line of December 7th. This was another, life change. But now we've got people who, in generations that have now graduated high school that were not even in college or graduate, they were not even born. Mm-hmm. And do you sense from your writing of this book that maybe this was an interest that hopefully there'll be a remembrance? Because right now, someone who served in Congress, someone who's been around, we're divided right now. And whether people want to admit it, not admit it, whatever, we're divided. What about these stories do you think maybe could help some of the younger people who didn't have a remembrance of that unity coming together, and also for some of us who are older to remind us of this?
That's funny you should say that, because I interviewed a college student. He is 20 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I said, what does 9/11 mean to you? And he said, in the day, I was in a crib at my parents' house. So I don't have any recollection of 2001. He said, but when I entered kindergarten, first grade, second grade, I remember saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I remember saying a prayer for them, all the fallen soldiers, first responders. Right. So in his story, it wasn't about the day. It was about what happened the years on September 11th after that he remembers as a young man growing up. And that's funny you touch base on that, because my daughter is a senior in high school. As a matter of fact, I was talking with somebody yesterday that's a little bit older than her, maybe a little bit younger than your daughter. And she thinks that COVID was kind of like that, because she remembered going to work, and then all of a sudden the next day they said, don't come to work, we are shut down, out of the clear blue. And she's like, what am I doing? And so she correlated that day when America shut down to maybe this day. Is it the same? Absolutely not. But it's the same thing for them. It's something that resonates with them. So the older generation, my father used to talk about Pearl Harbor from his dad.
Right.
And whatever my grandpa communicated to my dad is what my dad communicated to me.
Right.
And then Kennedy was assassinated, just like you referred to. I have to hear that first thought from my dad, because that was 1963. I wasn't even born yet. My dad remembers going home. They were all dismissed from the Catholic school here and from Cincinnati. So everybody went home. Right. And back then you all walked. So it didn't matter if you had school buses back then. Everybody trudged through snow on November 22nd anyway. So it didn't really matter. But he remembers where it was. And then the Challenger explosion that happened when I was a freshman in high school. I remember being in that moment. So everybody has those pivotal moments in their lives as Americans that unites us or makes us open up the communication airwaves more. And it makes us treasure and really understand what it means to be a proud American. And that's what I took from this book, because there's all walks of life in this book. Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think that's important. And one of the things that I've appreciated just in our time here talking about this book is the interesting point that I appreciate what your friend said about COVID. My wife was retiring in 2020. She was getting ready 30 plus years of teaching. She was in her last few months, and all of a sudden, one day she was told not to go back to school, and she had already had to be gone that week because I was one of the first who had been, quote, exposed and quarantined and member of Congress. So she had to stay home because the school didn't know how to deal with it. Then all of a sudden they said, we're not going back to school. What Lisa did not know, and I think it's sort of applicable here in a little bit, is that was when she walked out of there that previous week, that was the last time she would have been with those kids. She never was with them in a classroom again. And it makes a huge psychological difference. What I see different, though, is that shutdown unfortunately tended in many ways to draw us apart in COVID. 9/11, Challenger, Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, 7, seemed to, at least in certain ways, some of those not as much, but especially the Challenger, especially 9/11, especially Pearl Harbor, pulled us closer together.
Mm-hmm.
What in your conversations with folks, especially who had real remembrances of 9/11, what do you think made it that, as you said earlier, brought us together as Americans? What was that? Was there a certain theme when you talked to people about that?
Yes, sir, there was. And it was the true heart of what makes America so awesome to the world. I lived in Japan. I've been all through Asia, Australia. I've been everywhere, Mexico, Canada, everywhere. And when I was there, everybody wanted to come to America. Everybody wanted to be Americans. And we have that glow about us. We have a very powerful glow that people can see from afar. Right. And they want to be Americans. And on that day, on 9/11 in 2001, we all together came as a unit. And that's the theme of this book on 9/11, because in 100 years, it's going to be 9/11 a.m. And 500 years, unless there's a new Caesar or somebody rewrites how it works, there's going to be 9/11 p.m. And it's going to take somebody like our kids to explain that to their kids, to explain it to them, that we are powerful. And we don't have to have bad stuff or detrimental stuff hit us at all different angles to unite us as a country. We just don't. We really don't. We have to be better than what we are. Our true character, somebody said, is what we do when no one is around.
Right.
And if that really defines who we are, seeing some of the stuff throughout the news and social media, that's not really who we are as a country. Who we are is, somebody said, where are we going to be at? What time are we going to be at the swimming pool? What time is the Reds game? Let's come over and watch the Reds game. Let's watch Notre Dame play. Or in my case, let's watch the Bearcats beat the Bulldogs again.
Now, come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just remind you, and if I had the ring, I'd show you the ring, and we'd just...
That's right. But that's the theme behind it, is we don't have to have a reason just to come together. We don't. We don't have to entertain. We don't have to just make a humongous expedition out of something. Just walk over and say hi to your neighbors. Have them come over for a cup of coffee. It doesn't have to be anything other than that. A friend of mine who was passed away from cancer years ago, the priest said, how many of you spoke to this young man before you knew he was diagnosed with cancer? And nobody answered it because they didn't want to be under the gun.
Right.
But he made a good point. We don't have to have a positive or a negative reason just to pick up the phone or to walk over and say hi. Do you need something? I'm going up to the store. Do you need a ride to the bank or what have you? So that in 9/11 to me is the message. We were united for years after 9/11.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting we should talk about this. I just recently was asked to go back and do a homecoming service at a church where my mother was, and her family grew up, and we still have land. It's in a very rural part of Georgia. And my message that morning, I went back to Joshua in discussing the 12 stones and, the setting up of remembrance. And what you said, and it's amazing, it's over 240 plus times in scripture. It says, remember, do this, remember, or remember this. And it was, and especially with those stones, it says, when your children ask why these stones are here, you can tell them. And I think the memorial at 9/11, you know, especially in New York, also in Pennsylvania, also at the Pentagon, it gives us that reminder. But we're a very short, unfortunately, winded society when it comes to remembrance, and it changes on how we go about, you know, that in our life. When you look at 9/11 and you talk about it, because I can still remember, you know, everybody put out a flag. Everybody, you know, there was every fire truck you saw had a flag. And I'd served as a volunteer fireman. So again, I'm like you. It's sort of really, I was watching when the building started going down, and all I could think about was the firemen and the others, not just in the building, but we're at the bottom of the building. I mean, those were just massive buildings.
Yes, sir.
You know, I had somebody say this the other day, and I disagreed with them, but there was something quietly in my spirit that said, I hope this is not true. And they, talking about today's society, they made an offhanded comment that they said, you know, it's going to take something tragic to bring us back together. Hopefully in a book like yours, there are stories that maybe resonates with one, that'll resonate with two, that'll resonate with four, that'll resonate with eight, that says, as you just said, Dutton, we don't have to get there. Jim, if there was one or two stories out of your book that if that you remember that you can say, wow, this is in the book, but these are stories that impacted you as you were making it, what were they?
The first one that I elaborated on a little earlier was the woman that was in the Sears Tower. She was a chef, and she actually had to deliver food all the way up to 101st floor in the Sears Tower in Chicago. Back then, nobody had cell phones. We just didn't have
Not
them.
as much.
Correct. So after she set up all the food for her customer on the 101st, she had to come down. And in that time, the security in the Sears Tower was notified that the Sears Tower needs to go to complete lockdown. Nobody in, nobody out. So imagine her and her staff coming down that elevator all the way down to the loading dock, opening it up, and then there's a security officer right there saying, I'm sorry, you know, you can't leave. We really don't have too much information to share with you right now because the information is coming in, but this is what we have. If you want to come over here with some other colleagues and some other friends. And she didn't know anybody. So she huddled around, like I said, that little black and white television set. People were crying. People were giving hugs. People didn't know what to do. And then she opened up the back of the van and said, well, I have all this food. We're not going anywhere. How about I share some of this food with you? Because I'm not going down the street. I'm not going to the next customer. I am done. And it wasn't for about 4 hours that they reopened the gates up and they were able to leave. But in her story, she became friends with them all. And they were consoling each other. They were expressing their concerns for the day, their mom and their dad, their aunts and their uncles. And then there was the another gentleman who said that he was getting ready to give a speech. And on the news, his son called him and said, turn on the TV right away. And he did. And then that's where he saw the devastation in New York and Pennsylvania. So his speech for the day was re-scripted to how to be a proud American and how to become together as a unit. And he said he remembered the journalist saying that while the firemen were going up, everybody else was coming down and they were covered with debris and smoke. And you remember those horrific videos and showing in live footage. It's very sad. And he remembered that day. And all of us have that vision. All of us do. But the vision that I remember the most is all of us coming together on that little cul-de-sac here in Cincinnati, Ohio. Yep. And there were probably 10 or 15 of us. And one of the gentlemen was a local buyer for Kroger here in Cincinnati. Mm. And he was directed that morning by Kroger to buy every single American flag that any of their suppliers had. And that's where he spent all day, was buying all the American flags that day. And it's very powerful. And it's very intriguing to hear each person remembers what they were directed to do or what they had to do. Fireman ran up. He was directed to buy American flags. There's a story in there where a gentleman's in a destroyer off Norfolk. General Quarters was called, and he said, General Quarters is never called at 9 a.m. Right. But boom, they loaded everybody up, and off the coast of New York they went. So everybody has a story to share. Yes, sir.
Well, it has the stories, and I think they all mean. I can remember, and just sitting here talking with you, and hopefully for the podcast listener and folks, you can go to the DougCollinsPodcast.com. You download, share it. Of course, you get this podcast anywhere you get it. But I want you to, what I'd love for you to do, if you're listening to the podcast today, is go to the email link that's on the website, the DougCollinsPodcast.com. Hit the email link. Give me your story. I would love to do a follow-up to this podcast, because we're going to air this. It'll be right around 9/11 time, for, as you well know. And I would love to do another one and maybe have Jim back on and we read some of these responses. I mean, because I think bringing us together, because this leads me to my next story. I remember that night, Jim, my wife, I don't think I went to sleep until like 1 or 3 in the morning, because you were just, are they going to find anybody? Is something else going to happen? Because we really didn't know, what was going on. This was a moment, there was probably what I would say a good 18 to 24 hours in which we didn't know what was happening, especially the first 12. It's like, is more going to happen? What is this? Every plane. I can remember going out and seeing no planes in the sky. That was the most eerie thing I remember to this day. For about 8 days, 9 days after going up, because we're in a flight pattern where I live for Hartsfield in Atlanta, one of the busiest airports in the world, and planes are going all the time. And I remember standing out there one night a few days after and saying, it will seem normal when I see planes in the sky again. And it just took a little bit longer. But you brought up something that's interesting. And you said that, we talk about those horrific images that we saw. And again, this is a question, just two guys talking. Why about 5 or 6 years after did we stop seeing those images? I mean, if you think about it, news quit showing them. It's hard to find them on it. So this generation that you talked about that didn't have first experience, they're hearing it, but you don't see the image. You have to look for them. You have to find them. I personally think that's wrong. I think we should. It is horrifying, but it is the same point. It was an event that happened. You cannot whitewash the history or just move it to what you want it to be. And I think that's one of the reasons that maybe we're ours divided. We've forgotten that 22 years ago, come this September 11th, we had a moment that changed us.
Mm-hmm. Correct. I think for the sake is, if you open up on social media a newspaper's post for the day, under that it always says 1 minute read or 2 minute read. Well, years ago, that didn't mean anything. You wanted to read it.
Right.
Leading up to 9/11, I believe there was a major shark infestation off the coast, on the East Coast, all the way from Miami all the way up to New York. They were reporting about shark attacks, like they are today. They're trying to create something, and they move on to the next story, but they don't hone in on what is important, and they don't carry that on. And I think it's because we're too touchy-feely sometimes. We don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. We don't want to bring up past memories. You're walking on thin ice, maybe. It's a topic. It's sensitive to people. So I do understand why some people don't want to talk about it, but I think as Americans, we have to learn from what happened to us on 9/11, the sacrifice that everybody took. There's a guy in the book that was the National Guard, called him right up. He was selling cars, and the next day he's gone.
Yep.
I mean, he got called up. So those are powerful stories. And like you said, 21 years later, we'll talk about it here today because we're getting closer, and the other outlets, and everybody will start to talk about it. But it's kind of like Halloween. Halloween, you lead up, and then as soon as Halloween's over with, we're on to Thanksgiving, and it's behind us. Right. So I hope that people, when they read the book, that they share where they were with their friends and with their neighbors and with their loved ones and their coworkers, and they talk about it when they see 9/11 in March, 9/11 at PM, and maybe they're watching a movie or something gives out, and they pause it for a moment, and they share whoever they're with, what happened to them on that day. That's what I would like to happen.
Well, and that you sort of answered a question I was going to ask you, is what would you want to leave people with? I tell you this interesting note, as I've been listening to you talk about 9/11, both morning and afternoon, or evening, it reminds me of my dad, who is still alive. He's still with us. He was a Georgia State Trooper, and his badge number was 219. And so for me, especially like in the afternoon or something, I see 219, I think of my daddy. And that's just, it's just that powerful thought. what the book is more of a coffee table book. It is. Talk to us a little bit about it, where people can get the book, again, the relationship with tunnels to towers, and just, how, people can be a part of this.
Absolutely. So with every purchase, a portion of the sales will go to Tunnel to Towers. The book just was released on the 15th, nationwide, Amazon, Books A Million, Joseph Beth, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, almost anywhere you can buy a book, it's available. So with that, the message is on 9/11 is we're within 3 weeks. Like you referred to earlier, once 9/11 is over with, we don't talk about it anymore. And I want this book to be on display. I want people to shed light on it, the positive things that came out of it. And it's okay to talk about the dark side of it. It's okay. We have to open up the communication line between everybody. We can't just pick or choose what we want to talk about, or maybe I'm going to hurt their feelings, or maybe that I'm not, or this person, or I agree with that person. Everybody in this book is from every single walk of life that you can imagine. But the unit is the American message. We all came together as one. And that's what I want everybody to get from this book. Everybody's Americans. Yes, sir.
Now, give them the name of the book again so they can go wherever they can look it up. Yes, sir.
The book is The Time, 9/11, A Time to Always Remember. So when we see that time, you should always remember 9/11/2001. Yes, sir.
Folks, you've been listening to Jim Serger, who's just written a wonderful book. Again, this time that we've spent together here on the podcast, just going on to it, I hope it gives you that reminder that there are poignant moments in life. We all have them, and in this one for our country, really triggered a response that we could all put aside differences and realize that we've been given a great blessing of this country. This country, I believe in American exceptionalism, as Jim said earlier, that people want to come here. There's something special about what happens in this country, and we can fight amongst ourselves. But I'm always reminded, like, is always saying, we can fight amongst ourselves as brothers and sisters, but nobody else picks on us. And we've got to cut back to that. There's more that really defines us together, has been said, than defines us apart. And I want us to get back to that. Jim, thanks for writing this, being responsive to that, and thanks for being on the podcast today.
Yes, sir. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. God bless America.
Hey everybody, MyPillow. I just wanted to let you know MyPillow is having the biggest sheet sale of the year. You have all helped build MyPillow into an amazing company that it is today. And now Mike Lindell, the inventor and CEO, wants to give back exclusively to his listeners. The Percale bed sheet set is available in a variety of colors and sizes, and they're all on sale. For example, the queen size is regularly priced at $89.98, but it is now only $39.98 with our listener promo code. Order now, because when they're gone, they're gone. You're not going to be able to get it. These Percale sheets are breathable. They have cool, crisp feel. They come with a 10-year warranty, 60-day money-back guarantee. Don't miss out on this incredible offer. There's a limited supply, so be sure to order now. Call 1-800-986-3994. Use the promo code Collins, COLLINS, or you can go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener square, and use the promo code Collins, COLLINS. Lisa and I sleep on these sheets every night. You will want to have them as well. They're a wonderful product. Go right now, either 800-986-3994, code word Collins, or go to mypillow.com. Also use the code word Collins to get this discount. You will not regret it.